It's the year 1347, and you're living in a medieval town somewhere along the coast of Europe. Or maybe you've settled inland among the green hills and farmland. Life has its rhythms. You wake when the church bells ring. You work or trade or tend to crops, and you sleep when darkness falls. But there's a feeling creeping through your community now, a kind of tension that people carry in their shoulders when they gather in the market square. The stories started about a year ago, drifting in from the east. Merchants and travelers passing through mentioned a sickness that was ravaging cities in China and the Mongol territories. They spoke of it almost in whispers, the way people talk about catastrophes that seem too distant to really affect them. The plague, they called it, some sickness that killed people very quickly. But you're in Europe now. Europe is civilized. You have churches and universities and cities with long histories. Disease is something that happens elsewhere to other people. Except now the stories are getting closer. In 1347, 4 Genoese grain ships arrived at ports in Sicily. These ships had come from Caffa, a city on the Black Sea, where there had been a siege. The Mongol warriors attacking the city, the Tartars, as some called them, they'd apparently catapulted infected corpses over the city walls. A desperate, grim strategy. The Italian merchants in that besieged port, they loaded their ships with grain and whatever goods they could gather, and they sailed west. They were trying to escape that sickness. They were trying to get home to safety. What they didn't know, what nobody could have possibly known at that time, was that they were carrying something far more dangerous than grain. The disease traveled with them, hidden in ways that medieval people had no framework for understanding. The ships reached different ports. Some accounts say they tried to dock in Genoa, their home city, but the port authorities refused them entry. They'd heard the stories too, so the ships sailed on, arriving in Marseille, in Valencia, in other Mediterranean ports. The disease spread through these port cities like someone spilling ink into water, and it spread slowly at first, then increasingly fast. It was in Sicily by late 1347. It reached southern Italy. By the end of 1348, it had travelled north through the Italian peninsula, into the Balkans, and was making its way through the Mediterranean towards Spain and France. You might have heard the news when merchants came through your town with their goods. There was a fever in Italy, they'd say. People were dying. Strange sores were appearing on the infected. It was a cautionary tale, something to think about briefly before moving on to the day's concerns. If you lived inland, removed from the major trade routes, you might not hear about it at all for many months. The disease moved along the lines of commerce. Grain ships, merchant vessels, trading caravans. These were the highways of the medieval world. Goods flowed along predictable routes, and those routes had been established over centuries. Genoese and Venetian merchants traded extensively with the Levant, with North Africa, with each other. They moved luxury goods, spices, silk, gems. They moved grain and wine and textiles. And now, whether they realized it or not, they moved something else entirely. By 1348, the plague was in Spain. It reached Barcelona and Valencia. It was in the south of France, in Avignon, where the Pope lived. A year earlier, in 1347, it had arrived in Messina, Sicily, and within weeks it had spread through southern Italy. By 1349, it was moving through France and toward England. By 1350, it had crossed the Channel and was in southern England. The spread continued northeast, through the Baltic regions, into Scandinavia, reaching Russia by 1351. The disease travelled faster than most people could comprehend. If you lived in a major city or near a trade route, You might hear news of its approach days or even weeks before it arrived. You might hear reports filtering in from neighbouring towns. But reports was all it often was. Stories that seemed exaggerated. Rumours that didn't quite make sense given what people thought they knew about disease. Medieval cities at this time had their own sanitation systems, or at least attempts at them. Venice had regulations about cleaning streets. Cities had officials responsible for public health of a sort, but their understanding of how disease spread was fundamentally wrong. They believed in miasma theory, the idea that disease was spread by bad air, by corrupt vapors rising from sewage or decaying matter. The solution seemed logical. Avoid foul-smelling places, burn aromatic fires to purify the air, perhaps wear protective masks or carry pomanders filled with sweet-smelling herbs. Nobody understood that the disease spread through fleas. Nobody understood bacteria. The microscope wouldn't exist for hundreds of years. The germ theory of disease wouldn't be developed until the 1800s. In 1348, when the plague was spreading rapidly through Europe, the most educated physicians in the world still believed that disease could be transmitted through bad air, that the stars and planets influenced sickness, that the body contained 4 humours that needed to be kept in balance. So when authorities tried to respond to the plague's approach, they responded in ways that made sense to them, but that often made things worse. Religious processions were organized. Hundreds or thousands of people gathering together to pray for divine protection. Church services grew more crowded. In some cities, the authorities ordered cleanliness initiatives, which was good in theory, but the underlying problem, the fleas on rats, the actual vectors of disease, remained completely invisible. In some places, cities tried quarantine, though they didn't call it that yet. Venice would eventually develop the concept of isolating ships for 40 days before allowing them to dock. The word quarantine would eventually derive from the Italian 40 giorni, 40 days. But even these attempts were haphazard and often counterproductive because they didn't address the real problem. People fled infected areas, and in fleeing, they spread the disease further inland. The psychological atmosphere in your town, in the weeks before the plague actually arrived, would have been strange. There'd be a mixture of fear and disbelief. The stories were terrifying, people dying within days, whole families succumbing, bodies piling up faster than they could be buried. But there was also skepticism. Exaggerations happened. Travelers told wild tales. Maybe the situation in Italy and France wasn't as bad as people said. Maybe it would never reach you. At the same time, there was a sense of helplessness. What could be done against a plague? If all the prayers and processions in Italy hadn't stopped it, what made anyone think your town would escape? Some people began to feel a kind of grim fatalism. If God had decided to send this plague, then it would come whether you prepared or not. Others became more pious, attending church services with renewed earnestness, making donations to charitable organizations, trying to earn divine favor through increased devotion. Merchants and traders who passed through your town would have carried the plague with them, possibly without knowing it. They'd sleep at the local inn. They'd conduct their business in the market square. They'd trade with your neighbors. And if they'd come from an infected area, if fleas infested their cargo or their clothing, then the disease might be settling into your town, even as people continued about their daily business, completely unaware. The medieval world was more connected than we sometimes imagine. Trade networks spanned continents. News traveled, though slowly. But the mechanisms of disease spread, the fleas on rats, the flea populations in merchant ships and grain stores that travelled at its own pace, invisibly, following the same routes but on its own timeline. As autumn turned to winter in 1348 or 1349, depending on where your town was located, you might have started to hear of cases closer to home. Someone in the next town over had fallen ill with a fever and died within a week. A merchant family had taken sick. A respected merchant had died, along with his entire household. These stories stopped being abstractions from distant places. These were people whose names you might know, whose goods you'd bought, whose ships you'd seen in the harbour, or whose caravans had passed through your town. The authorities in your town might have started to meet about the situation. What could be done? Some towns banned travel from infected regions, edicts that were almost impossible to enforce. Some built pest houses outside the city walls, hospitals meant to isolate the sick, though nobody really understood how these hospitals should function or what treatments should be offered. Some towns initiated cleaning ordinances, ordering waste removed from streets, ordering public wells guarded against contamination, burning aromatic woods to purify the air. None of these measures would stop the plague. None of them addressed the actual vector of transmission, but they represented an attempt to do something to maintain some sense of control in the face of an incomprehensible threat. They reassured people that the authorities were aware of the problem and taking action, even if those actions were ultimately futile. The social disruption was beginning. In some Italian cities, once the plague had arrived, trade virtually ceased. Markets were abandoned. People boarded themselves into their homes. Some fled to the countryside, reasoning that rural areas would be safer than crowded cities. This reasoning made a kind of sense, but it also meant that people fleeing infected cities could carry the disease into villages and farmland that might otherwise have been spared. Clergy began dying from the plague at alarming rates. They were among the first to care for the sick, to hear confessions, to administer last rites. As more clergy died, their numbers couldn't be replenished fast enough. Monasteries were depopulated. Some towns found themselves without a priest. This added to the sense of chaos and abandonment. Not only was your community suffering this inexplicable plague, but the spiritual guidance and comfort that the church provided was becoming scarce. Families were making impossible decisions. If one member of the household fell ill, should the rest of the family leave and try to escape to an uninfected area? Should they stay and risk their own lives caring for the sick? Some families fled at the first sign of illness in a neighbor's house. Others stayed together, reasoning that the family unit was more important than individual survival. The smell of death was beginning to permeate certain areas. As more people died, as burial grounds became overcrowded, the stench of death itself became a physical presence. People didn't understand that this smell was just a smell, not actually a vector of disease. They believed in miasma, that the foul odor itself was dangerous. The smell became one more element of dread. And through it all, fleas continued to bite. They jumped from rats to humans, or sometimes they bit humans directly, and they transmitted the bacterium Yersinia pestis with every bite. The medieval world had no way to see these fleas, no way to understand what was happening. The plague was spreading through mechanisms that were completely invisible. By the time the plague actually appeared in your town, it might not have come as a shock. You'd probably been hearing about it for weeks, maybe months. You'd heard the testimonies of refugees from infected areas. You'd absorbed the stories of bodies piling up faster than they could be buried, of children being orphaned, of wealthy families being wiped out completely. The psychological dread had been building, and then it stopped being abstract. Perhaps it was someone in the market who fell ill. Perhaps it was the innkeeper's daughter. Perhaps it was someone who travelled to an infected city and had come home. What matters is that one day, in your community, you began to notice someone with the telltale signs. A fever, swelling in the groin or under the arms or in the neck, and the realization, slowly spreading through your town, just as the disease itself was spreading, that the plague had come. It was no longer something that happened elsewhere. It was here, and it was going to change everything. It's a few days after those first cases appeared in your town. The innkeeper's daughter, the merchant from the next village over. You've seen the fear settling into people's faces like morning mist that won't burn off. And now it's your turn. You wake up one morning feeling off. Not dramatically so, but enough that the routine of your day feels heavier than usual. Maybe it's been building for a day or two, this subtle shift, because the plague's incubation period typically lasts anywhere from 1 to 7 days after exposure. You've been bitten by fleas without realizing it, perhaps from a rat in the grain stores, or one that hitched a ride on a traveler's clothing. The bacterium Yersinia pestis has been quietly multiplying in your lymph nodes, waiting. At first, it feels like any other illness you've weathered before. A common fever, perhaps the ague that sweeps through every autumn, or one of those stomach complaints from bad water or spoiled food. Your head starts to throb with a dull headache, the kind that makes bright sunlight uncomfortable and loud voices grating. Chills come next, wrapping around you despite the blankets your family pulls over you. Then the fever climbs, pushing your temperature up to around 38 to 39 degrees Celsius, sometimes hitting 40 or even 41. 100 to 106 degrees Fahrenheit in the terms we use today. Your body shakes with the cold despite the heat building inside, a confusing dance of sensations that leaves you drenched in sweat one moment and shivering the next. Your joints ache too, a deep soreness in your knees, elbows and shoulders, as if you've been laboring too long in the fields or carrying heavy loads up steep streets. There's a general malaise that settles over you, a bone-deep weariness that makes even sitting up feel like effort. You might try to push through it at first. After all, everyone gets sick sometimes. Maybe you tell your spouse or a close family member first, the one who tends the hearth and knows your body better than anyone. They feel your forehead, note the heat, and suggest rest. Perhaps a child or sibling hovers nearby, offering water or thin barley gruel, their faces showing worry but not yet panic. These symptoms mimic so many everyday ailments of the time. Fevers were commonplace from everything. Malaria like agues, influenza, dysentery from contaminated wells, even food poisoning from undercooked meat or moldy bread. Vomiting might start too, along with some abdominal cramps and loose stools, which people often chalked up to bad humours or tainted food from the market. You dismiss it yourself, thinking of the time last harvest when half the village had the same gripes and everyone recovered fine. Why call a physician yet? They're expensive after all. A visit could cost a labourer's weekly wage, or more for someone of modest means like you. Only the wealthier merchants or guild masters summon them lightly. For most, it's a last resort after home remedies fail. Your family steps in with what they know. They might brew a tea from sage or wormwood, herbs that grow wild nearby and are thought to cool fevers and settle stomachs. Perhaps they apply a cool cloth to your brow or make you sip vinegar diluted in water, believing it balances the body's humours. Chicken broth simmers if you're lucky enough to have a hen. or they grind barley into pottage with some onions for strength. Someone suggests bleeding a little from the arm with a small knife to release the bad blood, though they hold off for now. These are the remedies passed down through generations, sensible in their world, where disease comes from imbalances inside you or foul air from outside. But there's a nagging sense that this feels different. The fatigue deepens faster than usual, progressing from mild tiredness to an overwhelming weakness that pins you to your straw mattress. Sweating episodes come in waves, soaking your rough linen shift and the bedding beneath, leaving you shivering again as the fever spikes. Your mind wanders a bit, not quite delirious but foggy, making it hard to focus on prayers or even simple thoughts. You notice how others in town have taken sicker quicker lately, how the church bells tolled more frequently last week. Your family exchanges glances, whispering about the stories from Italy, the fevers that don't break, the people who waste away. It's been a day, maybe two, and still no improvement. The headache pulses steadily. The chills rack your frame even as sweat beads on your skin. Your spouse urges more rest, but you catch the tightening in their voice, the way they peer at you longer than usual. Would you call the physician now? The cost weighs heavy, silver pennies you can't easily spare, perhaps bartered goods instead. But the malaise clings, heavier each hour, and that joint pain feels like it's burrowing deeper. The vomiting persists, leaving you parched despite the water they bring. Everyone's had fevers before, sure, but this one lingers with an unfamiliar insistence, and the weakness makes even turning over an ordeal. Around this point in your discomfort, after you've shared how oddly persistent these symptoms feel compared to past illnesses, it's worth noting how helpful these kinds of historical deep dives can be for understanding our past. Fascinating, right? And hey, subscribe if you want more journeys through time like this one. It'll help the channel keep bringing you these calm explorations. By the third day, though, denial fades. The fever holds steady or climbs. The sweating doesn't ease, and that profound fatigue leaves you barely able to lift your head. Your family sees it too. The pallor beneath the flush, the way your breaths come shorter. This isn't the usual sickness that passes with rest and herbs. Something deeper is wrong, and the stories you've heard from plague-stricken neighbors echo too closely now. It's been 2 or 3 days now since that nagging fever took hold, and you're still pinned to your straw-filled mattress, the weakness deepening with each passing hour. The chills and sweats have become your constant companions, the headache a steady drumbeat behind your eyes, but something new stirs beneath the surface. You shift uncomfortably and feel it first, a tender swelling in your groin, like a knot tightening under the skin. These are buboes, swollen lymph nodes inflamed by the Yersinia pestis bacteria, battling through your body. The body's attempt to contain the infection that's now overwhelming it. They typically appear in clusters where your major lymph nodes sit. The groin area first for many, then under the armpits, sometimes along the neck or behind the ears. Yours starts small, maybe walnut-sized at first, but grows steadily, reaching the size of an apple or even a hen's egg within hours or a day. The pain is sharp and insistent, a throbbing ache that worsens with any movement. Crossing your legs, even breathing deeply if it's high in your chest. Touching it sends jolts through you, tender to the point where clothing brushing against it feels like fire. At first, the skin over the bubo is taut and red, stretched tight like a drumhead, but as it progresses, that redness darkens to purple or blackish hues around the edges, the surrounding tissue bruising from ruptured vessels beneath. To the touch, it's initially rock hard, unyielding like a stone embedded in flesh, but over time it softens, becoming fluctuant, squishy and filled with pus as the infection builds pressure inside. Smaller pustules might dot the skin nearby, little raised bumps filled with fluid, or additional pea-sized swellings appear along the lymph chains, mapping the plague's path through your body. You notice it while trying to adjust your position, perhaps reaching down to check why the pain has localized so fiercely. The psychological blow lands harder than the physical one. Everyone in town knows what these swellings mean now. The stories from Italy and France describe them exactly. Glandular swellings that mark the plague's victims unmistakably. Panic rises in your chest, colder than any chill. This isn't a vague fever anymore. It's the sign that brands you as infected, the thing neighbors whisper about when they pass your door. Your family sees it too, when you show them or when they help change your sweat-soaked linens. Faces pale, hands pull back instinctively, though love keeps them near. It's the pestilence, someone might murmur, crossing themselves. They react with a mix of horror and grim resolve. Some flee the room for fresh air, others stay to pray, their eyes wide with the knowledge that caring for you now risks their own lives. Children are kept away, ushered to a relative's home if possible. The household dynamic shifts instantly. You're no longer just sick. You're plague-stricken, a living warning. Medieval accounts from physicians like Guy de Chauliac describe them vividly. Swellings in the groin, in the armpits, and under the tongue, he wrote, noting their rapid growth and painful nature. Chroniclers in Florence and Avignon reported victims with buboes as large as a common apple, some lancing them themselves in desperation, only to spread the poison further. You might try to hide them at first, binding cloth tightly around your waist or wearing extra layers, but the pain makes it impossible. The swellings bulge visibly, staining cloth with seepage if they start to soften. Explaining it to your family feels surreal, words stumbling out between winces. Feel here, it's grown since morning. God help us. They nod knowingly, no need for elaboration. The town's recent deaths have educated everyone. Self-treatment tempts you, maybe a hot poultice of onions and figs to draw it out, or lancing it with a heated knife as some desperate folk do. Believing release of the bad humors will save you, but the fear holds you back. Tales circulate of those who tried and bled out or worsened overnight. Around this moment, when those unmistakable swellings confirm what you've dreaded, it's kind of wild how such visible signs shaped entire communities back then. Pretty chilling history, huh? And hey, subscribe if these deep dives into the past help you unwind at night. Pustules might multiply, itchy and warm, while the main buboes pulse relentlessly. Hiding becomes futile. Even if you cover them, the odor of infection seeps through, and your grimacing gives you away. The realization settles like a stone. There's no denying it anymore. These aren't harmless swellings from strain or injury. You have the plague marked plainly for all to see, and the terror of what comes next hangs heavy in the air. It's been a day or so since those unmistakable buboes swelled under your skin, turning every shift on the mattress into agony, and your family can no longer pretend this is just a stubborn fever. Whispers turn to decision. Someone must fetch the physician, even if it means scraping together what little coin you have. In a medieval town gripped by plague, summoning a doctor isn't simple. You send a trusted family member or servant on foot or horse to the physician's home, perhaps a half-day's journey away if he's in the next town. Only the wealthy, merchants, guild masters, nobles, can afford this easily. For you, a craftsman or labourer, the cost might equal a month's wages, paid in silver pennies, goods like cloth or livestock, or even promises against future work. Word spreads quietly to avoid panic among neighbours, and you wait, feverish and sweating, as hours stretch into a full day. When he finally arrives, the physician cuts a distinctive figure, long robe of wool or fine cloth, perhaps a hood pulled low, carrying a wooden case of instruments, vials of herbs, and a urine flask. His demeanour is calm, authoritative, the educated man among the fearful, university trained in places like Paris, Montpellier, or Salerno. He speaks Latin phrases mixed with the local tongue, projecting confidence that soothes your family even as your pain throbs. He believes disease stems from imbalance of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, corrupted by miasma, those invisible bad airs rising from swamps, sewage, or even celestial influences. Planets and zodiac signs matter deeply. He might glance at an astrological chart, noting if Saturn or Mars is ill-positioned, delaying treatment until a favourable hour. Questions come first. When did the fever start? Any travel? Diet lately? Bad smells nearby? He examines you at arm's length, wary of contagion despite not grasping it truly. Pulse-taking follows, his fingers on your wrist counting beats, are rapid for fever, weak for decline, while he peers at your tongue, eyes and skin. Then uroscopy, the centerpiece. Your family provides a morning urine sample in a clear flask. He holds it to candlelight, inspecting color, dark for bile excess, cloudiness, phlegm, sediment, putrefaction, even tasting it for sweetness or bitterness to pinpoint humoral imbalance. Too hot and dry, he might diagnose, seeing plague's fiery signs aligning with your buboes. Bloodletting seems logical to him. Remove excess hot blood to restore balance, like draining a flooded field. He predicts your odds grimly. 50 in 100 survive if treated swiftly, though privately he knows plague's toll. For cures, he recommends expensive theriac, Venice treacle, a costly electuary of dozens of ingredients, viper flesh, opium, honey, spices like cinnamon, ginger, myrrh, even diamond dust in fancy versions, pounded into a paste believed sovereign against poison since Galen. Costly at $1 or more per dose, imported from apothecaries. His fee, negotiated up front, perhaps 12 pence for the visit, more for remedies, paid half now, half on recovery. He'll return in 2 days if you improve, prescribing meanwhile. Bleed half a pint from your arm vein, herbal draughts to purge bowels, aromatic sponges against miasma. Beneath the learned exterior lies helplessness. Humoral theory can't fight bacteria, yet he maintains poise, the era's best science. Other physicians debate details. Some favour Galen's ancient texts strictly. Others incorporate Arabic medicine from Avicenna, emphasizing diet or astrology more. One might stress planetary conjunctions causing the plague wave. Another, corrupted air from earthquakes. They all circle the same flawed framework, doing their earnest best with what they know. Around this point, when the learned doctor lays out his humoral plan with such conviction, it's striking how earnestly medieval minds tackled the unknown. Pretty humbling, right? And hey, subscribe if these calm historical immersions help settle you into sleep. He gathers his case, nods gravely, promises return if God wills, and departs through the door marked with a warning cross, leaving prescriptions that align with his world's wisdom, but offer no real shield against the plague raging inside you. It's the morning after the physician's visit, or perhaps the same afternoon, if he's arranged for immediate action, and your family has summoned the barber surgeon. the practical man, who handles the bloody work physicians avoid. His theory, straight from the doctor's humoral diagnosis, holds that your blood runs too hot and abundant, fueling the plague's fire through imbalance of the four humours. Bloodletting will cool you, drain the excess, restore equilibrium like lancing a boil to release poison. It's standard practice, trusted since ancient Galen. Logical in their world, where visible blood loss equals purification. He arrives with his kit, fleams, those spring-loaded blades for precise cuts, and lancets, sharp scalpels for veins. First session targets your forearm vein, the median cephalic or basilica running along the inside elbow, easy access. He ties a tourniquet of cloth or leather above to swell the vein, swabs with vinegar or wine for cleanliness. The phleem snaps open with a click, slicing shallow but deep enough. Quarter-inch incisions through skin into the vessel wall. Blood wells dark and hot, caught in a basin or bowl. They aim for 8 to 16 ounces typically, half a pint or more, enough to pale your face and slow your pulse. The pain bites sharp at first, a stinging slash, then throbbing as blood flows. You feel lightheaded quickly, the room tilting, heart racing to compensate for volume loss. Shock sets in, cold sweat, nausea, faintness their goal. Believing syncope proves the bad humours exiting. Good, you're paling, the surgeon might say, approving. If buboes demand it, he shifts to neck veins, the jugulars, riskier with deeper cuts near arteries. Multiple sessions follow, every other day or twice daily for plague's fury, each removing more until you syncopate reliably, a sign of progress. For localized work near buboes, cupping comes next. Heated glass cups, fire flashed inside to create vacuum, sealed to armpit or groin skin, drawing blood to surface through pores. They scarify first, scraping skin with a many-bladed tool to open capillaries, then reapply cups, sucking tainted blood visibly. Leeches follow for precision. Fat black ones sourced from apothecaries or streams, applied wriggling to swollen areas. You feel their cold slime, then gentle sucking as mouths latch, anticoagulants in their saliva. Hyaridin, though unknown then, keeping blood flowing freely. They engorge over hours, dropping off fat and crimson, sometimes a dozen at once. Purging pairs with it. Laxatives like rhubarb or aloe force bowels empty. Emetics like hellebore or white wine with herbs induce vomiting. You retch violently into a basin, stomach heaving, the surgeon steadying you. Family watches anxiously, some turning away at the blood volume, others holding basins, murmuring prayers. The barber surgeon dominates, cheaper than physicians at mere pennies per session, trained in guild halls for cuts and extractions. Your weakening accelerates. Dizziness lingers between treatments. Strength ebbs from fluid loss. Plague fever unabated atop iatrogenic drain. They consider heavy loss beneficial, up to pints over days, monitoring urine output and tongue dryness. Family reactions mix hope and horror. Your spouse sponges fevered brow. Children peek fearfully. Elders nod at tradition's wisdom. Around this phase, when bloodletting and leeches represent medicine's earnest pinnacle despite the toll, it's oddly comforting how determined healers were. Fascinating commitment to their craft, right? And hey, subscribe if these methodical historical accounts ease you towards sleep. Sessions repeat, cups and phleems extracting more, yet buboes throb unchanged, fever grips tighter. You're physically weakened from relentless blood loss, pale and trembling, yet plague symptoms, chills, sweats, pain, march on undiminished. It's been days now since the physician's visits and the barber surgeon's relentless bleedings, and you're noticeably weaker, pale from blood loss. Yet the buboes still throb fiercely, the fever refusing to break. Official medicine has run its course without relief, so your family turns to every corner of desperation. Folk cures, wise women's law, anything that might coax mercy from this unrelenting affliction. The psychology of it all drives them. When learned treatments fail, you grasp at straws, believing sheer variety might overwhelm the disease, each remedy carrying ancestral weight or whispered success stories from neighbors. Someone recalls crushed emeralds, a remedy for the rich, gemstones ground to powder and swallowed, thought to neutralize poison at great expense, shillings worth that only merchants could spare. Poorer folk improvise with arsenic paste or mercury rubs smeared on buboes, toxic minerals mined nearby, more likely to harm than help with their blistering burns and metallic taste lingering on breath. Theriac persists too, that Venice treacle the physician praised, prepared laboriously with viper flesh dried and powdered, mixed with opium for pain, honey as binder, and spices, cinnamon, ginger, myrrh, even treacle from boiled grapes, pounded into a sticky electuary, a dose costing a labourer's wage, but promising Galen's ancient authority. Rosewater comes next, distilled petals soaked in vinegar, dabbed on wrists and forehead to cool hot humours and repel miasma. Herbal bundles hang nearby, feverfew for aches, wormwood to bitter the blood against infection, sage burned as incense or brewed into teas, their sharp aromas thought to purify corrupted air. Aromatic posies of rosemary, lavender and rue dangle from bedposts, clutched in hands, the belief strong that sweet scents drive out foul vapours carrying plague. Poultices form the mainstay, figs chopped with onions boiled soft, wrapped in linen, and bound hot to buboes overnight to draw out poison, their juices supposedly softening the swellings for later lancing. Yeast mixed with butter gets slathered on too, a fermenting paste believed to eat away corruption. Desperate hands heat irons for cauterization, searing buboes to burn out evil, the sizzle and smoke filling the room with charred flesh scent. Agony making you arch despite weakness. Superstitions layer in. Amulets of red thread or stag horns worn around neck, protective charms etched with crosses or runes from local lore. Religious relics appear. A splinter of saint's bone borrowed from church, touched to your skin, or cloth kissed by a wandering friar. Prayers invoke plague saints. San Roque, marked by his own bubo legend, Saint Sebastian pierced by arrows like plague pains, or San Rosalia of Palermo, whose intercession supposedly halted outbreaks. Family chants litanies softly through nights, rosaries clicking, beseeching divine pity. Wise women arrive at dusk, local healers with reputations for the green arts, brewing decoctions of willow bark for fever, elderflower for sweats, yarrow to staunch inner bleeding. They soften buboes further with treacle-soaked rags before attempting shallow pricks, whispering incantations over steaming herbal baths you can't fully take. The wealthy procure imported balsams or gold-infused elixirs. Your family barters for treacle knockoffs or wild-gathered substitutes. Tree resin for myrrh, local honey for imported. They believe because hope demands it. Herbs balance humours naturally. Gems hold celestial virtue. Saints intervene where medicine falters. Desperation fuels choices. Tales of one survivor poultice here, a relic cure there. Each anecdote outweighing plague's grim statistics. Your spouse rotates remedies hourly. Children fetch herbs at dawn. Elders recount great-grandparents' survivals through similar trials. Around this swirl of desperate cures, when families threw everything at plague from gems to saints, it's remarkable how hope persisted amid horror. Profound human resilience, right? And hey, subscribe if these layered historical remedies help you drift off peacefully. Days blur into a haze. Some buboes soften perilously, perhaps rupturing with foul pus, staining linens yellow-black. Yet fever rages unabated, sweat unrelenting, the patchwork of remedies yielding no quarter to the plague's advance. It's days 3 to 5 now, that critical window where the plague digs deepest, your body a battlefield of worsening symptoms despite the barrage of remedies. The high fever persists relentlessly, spiking to 40 degrees Celsius or higher, refusing to yield to cool cloths or herbal drafts, your skin alternately scorching and clammy as temperature fluctuations rack you. Black spots begin peppering your skin, petechiae, tiny hemorrhages from ruptured vessels beneath, first on trunk and thighs, then spreading like ink blots, a grim sign of coagulopathy as the bacteria trigger disseminated intravascular coagulation. Livid marks darken your limbs, purplish blotches from subcutaneous bleeding, while acral necrosis threatens extremities, fingers, toes, nose tip blackening from poor circulation, tissue dying as septic shock starves them of blood. Vomiting turns bloody now, hematemesis staining basins crimson from eroded stomach lining or swallowed hemorrhage, each heave agony amid abdominal cramps and unrelenting diarrhea. Coughing starts ragged, dry at first, productive with frothy sputum if transitioning to pneumonic plague, the deadliest form where bacteria invade lungs directly. Breathing grows labored, chest pains stabbing like arrows. Saint Sebastian's plague saint invoked for this very torment. Diaphragm struggling against fluid buildup or pleural inflammation. Gastrointestinal distress amplifies. Bowels churning with blood-streaked stools. Dehydration setting in as you can't keep water down. Delirium clouds your mind. Fever-fueled hallucinations flickering. Shadowy figures at bedside. Voices of the departed. Time stretching or contracting unnaturally. Extreme weakness prostrates you fully, unable even to lift head from pillow. Muscles wasted from catabolism and blood loss. Swellings multiply. New buboes in neck. Armpits joining groin clusters, while carbuncles form. Larger necrotic sores oozing pus. Skin mottles hideously, marbled with red, purple, black from ecchymoses. The smell of infection thickening the air. Sweet, sickly gangrene odor from dying tissue. Immobility breeds bed sores, pressure ulcers reddening hips and heels into raw craters. Secondary infections fester in lancing wounds or leech bites, pus yellowing bandages. Family notes your rapid decline, prayers intensifying as survival odds plummet. Bubonic mortality near 80% untreated. Pneumonic nearing 100. Around this harrowing progression, when symptoms cascade into visible decay, it's sobering how plague stripped victims so methodically. Stark reminder of nature's indifference, right? And hey, subscribe if these unflinching historical accounts guide you gently to sleep. Your condition visibly deteriorates, body a map of affliction, survival seeming ever more unlikely as the plague claims deeper ground. It's day 5 or 6 now, your body a wreck of buboes and blackening skin. The household heavy with the realization that survival hangs by a thread, and fear of contagion grips everyone like an extra chill in the air. Your family's terror is palpable. They know the plague spreads mysteriously, perhaps through touch or breath. Stories circulating of whole households wiped out overnight. Some members flee early, perhaps a robust son or daughter sent to a distant relative's farm before symptoms showed. Reasoning self-preservation serves the bloodline better than martyrdom. Others stay, bound by duty or love. but even they keep distance, arms extended when passing bowls. Isolation practices harden quickly. Your room becomes a sick chamber, door barred from outside, windows shuttered against prying eyes. Quarantine attempts mimic city edicts. A 40-day isolation period, 40 giorni, though households manage crudely, no one leaving for market or church. A red cross or black mark appears on your door, painted hastily with pitch or chalk, warning passers-by of pestilence within. Standard in places like Venice or London by Plague's Peak. Restrictions bind tight. No exiting under penalty of stoning or fines. Guards sometimes posted by Town Watch. Food and water arrive via long poles or lowered baskets through windows. Bread, ale, thin pottage slid under doors on cloths, left untouched for hours to air against miasma. Care falls to the boldest. Usually women, your spouse or mother, their hands gloved in rags or smeared with vinegar. Elders too frail to flee but resigned to fate. Rarely men, who handle burials later. Children, if healthy, get shuttled to neighbours or kin outside town, spared the sight and risk, though orphans multiply daily. Emotional reactions fracture the family. Your spouse weeps silently while spooning broth, stealing resolve with prayers. Siblings argue over who stays next. Children huddle confused, asking why father screams at night. Priests grow scarce, many fled or dead, but if one comes, it's for last rites. Confession shouted through door cracks, absolution via blessed cloth on a stick, extreme unction oil-dipped fabric extended at arm's length. No entering plague homes. Religious preparation ramps up. Household shrines lit. Litanies chanted from afar, preparing your soul over body. Separation bites deep. Healthy kin bunk in attic or stable, glimpsing you through cracks, voices muffled across thresholds. Financial ruin looms. Your trade tools idle, debts unpaid, savings bled on physicians, future harvests lost if all sicken. Fear multiplies that others will fall, watching for chills in siblings, sweats in spouse, the household a tinderbox. Neighbours react with dread shunning. No visits, food baskets left curbside, whispers labelling your home death house. Social ostracization seals it. Your family becomes pariahs, blamed vaguely for poor hygiene or divine disfavour. Rumours swirl. He traded with Italians, drank from the wrong well, accusations flying toward outsiders or sinners. Blame sharpens if tension simmered before. Old feuds revived as they brought God's wrath. Around this fracture of family and community under plague's shadow, it's poignant how love battled terror in those quarantined homes. Raw human endurance, right? And hey, subscribe if these intimate historical glimpses lull you toward restful sleep. Other family members show twinges, coughs, fatigue, prompting fresh panic. You're isolated now, tended only by essentials at pole's reach. The family has begun preparing for your death, shrouds folded quietly in corners. It's day 7 or 8 now, the plague's grip unyielding after a week of torment, and the household knows the end draws near. Bubonic plague claims about 80% of victims within this time frame, while pneumonic form, if it's taken hold in your lungs, approaches near total mortality. The moment death becomes inevitable arrives subtly at first. Your breathing shallows to gasps. Organs begin failing one by one. Kidneys shutting down, liver overwhelmed by toxins, the septic shock spreading like fire through veins. Bleeding emerges from multiple orifices, nose, mouth, bowels, dark blood staining linens and basins, vessels rupturing under bacterial assault. Extreme pain dominates final hours. A full body agony from inflamed tissues. necrotic buboes bursting spontaneously, nerves screaming despite delirium. Respiratory failure chokes you, lungs filling with fluid or consolidating in pneumonic progression. Each breath a wet rattle. Heart falters next. Arrhythmia from electrolyte chaos and toxin overload, pulse thready, then absent. Consciousness fades in waves during septic shock. Fevered haze giving way to stupor. Final moments lucid enough for last words perhaps. A murmured prayer, name of a child, forgiveness sought through cracked lips. Your body's appearance at death horrifies. Skin mottled black-purple, extremities gangrenous, face sunken and cyanotic, buboes suppurating, the stench of gangrene thick. Family prepares swiftly, no time for ceremony. Strongest kin, often men, wash you minimally with vinegar, avoiding touch, wrapping in a plain linen shroud, no coffin for plague victims to prevent spread. Possessions face grim fate, clothes burned in a backyard pyre, bedding fumigated with sulphur or herbs, household goods quarantined or aired for weeks, tools passed to survivors if untainted. Burial depends on chaos level, proper grave if early and resources allow. A shallow pit outside town, with quicklime dusted over to hasten decomposition and kill vermin. Body breaking down in days. Bloating first, then liquefaction within a week in summer heat. Mass graves claim most, vast pits for dozens or hundreds. London's East Smithfield held 15,000. Bodies layered like cordwood, lime between strata, no markers. Others die alongside you daily. Neighbours carted off at dawn, carts groaning under loads, bells tolling ceaselessly. Sounds assault survivors, death carts' wheels on cobble, cries of "bring out your dead," mass graves, thuds of falling bodies. Sight sear, pyres smoking, pits overflowing, gravediggers collapsing from exhaustion. Your name might get scratched in church records if a clerk survives, or lost entirely amid thousands. Graves rarely endure. Mass pits erode, bones jumbled for centuries until modern digs reveal them. Family grieves rawly, keening softly behind quarantine doors, their own mortality risk acute. Half may sicken next, widows bartering tools for food. Around this inexorable end, when plague reaped so methodically, yet families clung to ritual. It's a quiet testament to human fragility. Profoundly humbling, right? And hey, subscribe if these somber historical passages ease you into deep sleep. You've died, as most plague victims did. Your body is prepared for burial according to available means, shrouded, perhaps carted to a lime-strewn pit with countless others. Your death marks just one among thousands in your town, as the plague scythe sweeps through Europe with staggering tolls. 25 to 75% mortality across regions. Some areas like Mediterranean ports losing half their people. Rural hamlets up to 3/4. London sees 2/3 vanish, from bustling streets to echoing silence. Florence shrinks brutally from 110,000 or 120,000 souls to around 50,000. Its palaces empty, guilds hollowed. England plummets from roughly 7 million to 2 million. Fields untended. Villages depopulated into ghost towns where weeds reclaim market squares. Mass burials overwhelm. Cemeteries overflow within weeks. Bodies stacked in pits like firewood. Gravediggers working dawn to dusk until they sicken too. Corpses lie unburied in streets, piled at doorways, the putrid reek inescapable. Social order fractures. Guilds collapse without members. Markets shutter. Lawmen flee or die. Clergy suffers worst. Priests dying at double population rates. Many abandoning posts for safety, refusing last rites through fear or clergy shortages. churches stand half empty, altars cold, sacraments sparse. Feudal bonds strain, manors lose serfs to death or flight. Labour shortages empower survivors who demand higher wages, meat in diets, better terms. Wages double or triple by 1350, from pence to shillings for day labour. Authorities panic with edicts like England's Statute of Labourers, capping pay at pre-plague rates, enforcing servitude, futile against reality. Peasant rebellions brew. England's 1381 Rising, France's Jacquerie, demands for freedom from villeinage. Land abandonment scars landscapes. Crops rot in fields, sheep graze fallow manors. Wool production surges as survivors herd rather than till. Economic disruption ripples. Trade routes falter without merchants. Italian banking strains, coin shortages bite. Flagellant movement surges. Bands of self-whipping penitents march through towns, drawing crowds, claiming to atone for God's wrath. Bloodied backs, drawing morbid fascination before papal bans. Religious questioning festers, a crisis of faith as prayers fail, God seemingly absent. Persecution erupts against Jews, accused of well poisoning despite papal defences like Clement VI's bulls. Strasbourg burns 2,000 alive, Basel 600. Property confiscated for communal debt relief. Recovery drags 200 years. Populations crawling back by 1500. Yet positives emerge for survivors. Labour scarcity yields better food, housing, mobility. Serfdom wanes. Women inherit trades. Wages buy opportunity. Around this seismic shift, when plague dismantled feudal Europe yet birthed modern freedoms, it's remarkable how catastrophe forged progress. Transformative pivot, right? And hey, subscribe if these sweeping historical aftershocks lull you into tranquil sleep. The plague's immediate ravages subside, but society stands fundamentally changed forever. Labour freer, faith shaken, Europe remade. By the time people in medieval Europe tried to make sense of the plague, they were working with a world picture that was almost completely different from what you know now. They lived in a universe of humours, bad air, and the will of God, not of bacteria and fleas. So much of what they believed seems wrong in hindsight, but it followed a kind of internal logic for them. Miasma and bad air. People leaned heavily on miasma theory, the idea that corrupted or foul air carried disease. They thought rotting matter, swamps, and bad smells released invisible vapors that entered the body and upset its balance. To protect themselves, they burned fires of juniper, pine, or other aromatic woods, hoping the smoke would disinfect the air and drive off the poison. People carried herbs like rosemary and rue, or pomanders filled with spices, believing that sweet smells could counteract deadly vapors. Divine punishment and the stars. Many also saw the plague as divine punishment for sin, a chastisement sent by God to correct a corrupted world. This belief encouraged processions, mass confessions, and calls for moral reform. But it also fostered fear and guilt, as people searched for whose sins might have brought disaster. Astrological texts of the time blamed an unusual conjunction of planets, especially Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, for corrupting the air and body. Physicians sometimes timed treatments according to zodiac signs, believing certain hours or planetary positions were better or worse for bloodletting and purging, scapegoats and persecution. Against this backdrop, Jewish communities became convenient scapegoats. Rumors spread that Jews had poisoned wells, and in many towns, this led to arrests, torture, and mass killings, with property confiscated by local authorities or neighbors. The persecution wasn't new. Jews had long faced legal and social restrictions in Europe. but the plague gave existing prejudices a deadly excuse. Some Jewish communities did have slightly different exposure patterns because of diet, housing, or water sources, which may have created the impression they were either less affected or secretively protected, further feeding suspicion. Pope Clement VI actually issued statements condemning these accusations and noting that Jews were dying of plague like everyone else. But these defenses often came too late or went ignored. What keen observers noticed, amid the fear, a few observers tried to describe the disease carefully. Guy de Chauliac, a prominent French surgeon in Avignon, wrote about two forms of the plague, one with buboes in the groin and armpits, and another attacking the lungs. He noted that the illness spread rapidly and that many who cared for the sick also died, suggesting some awareness of close contact risk, even if he lacked a mechanism. Still, his explanations stayed within the framework of humors, bad air, and divine will. What was really happening? Modern science shows that the underlying cause was the bacterium Yersinia pestis. In classic bubonic plague, it traveled primarily via fleas feeding on infected rodents, especially black rats that commonly lived in and around human settlements. Fleas infested grain shipments and cargo, riding in sacks and on animals along the same trade routes that carried spices and cloth. When infected fleas bit humans after their rodent host died, they injected the bacteria into lymph nodes, leading to buboes and systemic infection. Without germ theory, medieval people had no concept of microscopic organisms. There were no microscopes, no lab cultures, and no way to see what actually moved from rats to fleas to humans. What they did have was a coherent theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, that linked environment, diet, and temperament. Within that system, bloodletting and purging seemed rational ways to rebalance a body that had become too hot or wet, especially when fevers and sweats were so prominent. When theory met reality, sometimes their observations undercut their theories. They could see that close contact with the sick raised risk, and that certain crowded areas suffered more, hinting at person-to-person spread, especially with the pneumonic form. Yet they still folded these patterns back into miasma and humors, arguing that bad air gathered more thickly in crowded alleys, or that certain bodies were more predisposed to imbalance. Over time, repeated outbreaks pushed more attention toward practical measures like isolation, cleaning streets, and monitoring travel, even if the explanations stayed rooted in older ideas. In the end, medieval people worked with the tools and concepts they had, combining religious belief, classical theory, and direct observation as best they could. From a modern point of view, much of their understanding was wrong, but for their time, it represented a sincere attempt to impose order and meaning on a terrifying, invisible enemy.